I'm usually pretty still anyway, but I'll try to stand right here and talk to it and talk loud so you can hear me. Before we get started, I want to ask Brother King if he will lead us in an opening prayer. Thanks, sir. Well, it's good to see everybody here tonight. I'm glad you made a point to come out tonight, and hope you're enjoying this class as much as I have this time. I told Ben last Sunday night I really had enjoyed his study of David. And one thing, honest, I don't know 60 plus that I've ever been in a class where we talked about the mighty men. So that was good. And then he asked me if I would teach this week, and that's kind of where it fell. So I got to do a lot more study about the mighty man. So you always learn more if you're teaching than you do if you're sitting in class, or I do. I always do that. So I have learned a little bit. I want to try to share a little bit with y'all tonight. So we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And Ben kind of read through that first little part about David's last words. And he touched on the mighty men, but I thought, let's go back and revisit that a little bit. He said, talk about whatever you want to. You mean do something totally different you want to, but I thought we kind of stay with that, and since I had learned a little bit, try to share what I had learned. So our lesson is just entitled Mighty Men, and which all goes back to David. You know, David is one of the great biblical characters. If you've been in the church your whole life, that's one of the first stories you heard was David and Goliath. So, you know, all young kids know that story. A few things that makes David a great biblical character. First of all, we've mentioned over and over, he was a God after a man after God's own heart. Definitely not a perfect man. Had his faults, and very public faults sometimes. But even if that was not perfect, but he was still always trying to do the best that he could. You know his humble beginnings as a shepherd boy, very loyal to his dad, Jesse. While his brothers were all fighting the war, he was at home tending to the sheep and did a great job of that from what we read in the Bible. He was willing to, you know, guard them with his life's apparel, with fight off lions and bears and all those kind of things. So, you know, he was good at what he did. And then, of course, the next big thing we read about him was slayer of the Philistine giant Goliath. And, of course, like I said, that goes back to us little kids. And then after that, he was a loyal servant to King Saul. He was a musician and friend to his son Jonathan, great friends. Even Jonathan was a friend to him over his dad, but a great friend. So he was a great a man after God's own heart. He was a shepherd boy, loyal to his dad. You know, killed giants, loyal to King Saul, musically talented. We're all about psalms, and great friend to Jonathan. He was also, after that, he became known as a great warrior, a conqueror, military leader of the Israelites. You read where, you know, when he come back from battle, all people would sing and say, you know, Saul's killed his thousands, David his 10,000. So he enjoyed great success as a military leader. And then after Saul kind of went against God's word and chose not to be the leader he wanted to be, then he became the anointed in place of King Saul, which led to some bad things. And then also, like we said before, famous for his adultery with Bathsheba and then the murder of Uriah. And then the last thing I guess we could attribute to him was being the father of King Solomon. So a lot of things he accomplished, a lot of things that we know about him, and then also, of course, promised that a Savior would come through his family, through his lineage, and, of course, that came through. But say all that to say this. David was not a one-man show. As good as he was, he couldn't do it all by himself. He was a general, like we mentioned there before, and a great leader, but you can't lead unless somebody's following you. You know, I heard, like, if you remember, you see this all the time. You don't see it too much before. Small towns had Christmas parade, and all the local bands would come, and drum major would be out front, you know, leading the band. They're following behind playing. I heard one time, you know, if nobody's following you, you're just out for a walk, you know. So you got to have somebody to follow you, or you're not being a very good leader. So he definitely had people who followed him. And as an army leader, as a general, you got to have an army, and you also have to have a staff of of dedicated men, trusted men that's going to serve under you. And we have some military folks in our audience, so y'all know a little bit about that more than I do, actually. So, but they helped him. The people that was known to help him was this group that was called the Mighty Men. And another name you may or may not have heard for them is they're called the 30. Just like the apostles were called the 12, they mentioned here they called them the 30. Even though we'll talk a little bit about that number, but still the 30. But they helped him secure the throne. They helped him establish his kingdom and maintain it really throughout his reign. They were instrumental, divinely, and definitely in achieving God's will. 1 Chronicles 11:10, we says, "Now these are the chiefs of David's mighty men, who gave him strong support in his kingdom, together with all Israel, to make him king according to the word of the Lord concerning Israel." So they did it with the Lord's help, of course. Bravery was unparalleled, and their accomplishment in battle would make any warrior envious. You know, the things that they were able to do were just amazing. And the Bible gives us the name of these heroes, also describes some of their feat, some of their incredible feats they did, and also shows how they were organized a little bit tonight. So I want to touch on all those things. But first of all, before we get into that, just why is it important? Why were they included in the Bible? We read in 2 Timothy 3, I believe, maybe, where all Scripture is given for instruction, for reproof, rebuke, all those kind of things. So evidently it was there for us to read and us to learn about, and also people before us too. But why were they included here? Why take up that space? What makes it important? For one thing, I looked and found about 4 reasons maybe that they were included. Number one was for the honor of David. As their leader, he got, of course, honor for being a leader of these great men. You know, if you're a great coach and you win a lot of wins, and you know you get honored, but it's really because of the accomplishments of your folks. And not bragging, but a few years ago I was inducted in the Marion County Hall of Fame, and it had nothing to do with what I did as a player. I can promise you, because I was average at best. But a couple of my players were inducted that same night, that ceremony that year, and I told them, I said, the only reason I'm up here is because of what y'all did, you know. So you have to have great people behind you to make you do that. So by honoring them, it honored David and showed his leadership. Number two, for the honor of these men. So they did great things. They were instrumental in David's success, so they were honored here. And then also, probably not least of all, was to inspire future generations. You know, we have Veterans Day. We have, you know, different things where we honor the ones who have come before us. And the reason for that is to inspire future generations for what they might do. And, you know, those come around. We remember 9/11 recently. I know I made a point to talk about it in class because I asked it, which I knew. I said, how many of y'all were born when this happened? Of course, none of them, in high school kids, 10th and 11th graders. And so I said, what do y'all know about it? You know, so, and they did know a pretty good bit, but, you know, I just wanted to go over it again and bring it back to the remembrance of things that happened and the patriotism that kind of swelled the patriotism of our country during all that. And I had one boy, and if you knew him, you'd understand, but he just said, I tell you right now, if we had a battle, if we go to war, don't call me, I'm not going. I said, well, there's probably a lot of those people that thought that way before that happened, but when you get attacked on your own soil, you have to change it. You know, you have a little bit of change in mindset. So I said, you probably have a different mindset if it came down to it, you know. But he's one of those kind of ready, aim, fire, you know, shooting, and then think about or fire, aim. He would shoot off his mouth before he thought about what he was saying. But hopefully you learned a little bit about that day. But, you know, to inspire future generations in near times of these, and then also all the way to us. So not just us, but, you know, people have been reading this for hundreds, thousands of years. So to inspire those people also, set a legacy tradition. I was watching college football yesterday, Saturday, and they were showing one of the coaches in the locker room talking to his team before that, and he was talking to them about legacy. He said, you know, go out and make your mark. What's going to be your legacy? What are you going to leave behind for the teams that come after you? You know, that we established this, so now we're passing it down to you. Do you do great things? So that's true in sports. You preach that a lot. I know of one coach who was very successful, and he had his former players for that year's team. Anybody who had ever played for him who wore that jersey number, they wrote a little short note and put a card in that boy's locker telling them what it had meant to them to wear that jersey and that number and play on that team and play for that school and represent their community. And it was just a little bit of a legacy to pass that down to the next group, to make them a little bit more accountable, I guess you would say, to the honor that came before them. So, you know, that was one reason I think this is done. And then also, last probably not least, but to show how religion contributes to the inspiration of men of true courage. I got motivational signs in my room. I like those kind of things. And I've got one up that says, I think Teddy Roosevelt said it. It said to educate a man in mind but not morals is to educate a menace to society. So we see that. A lot of these mass murderers, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, some of these guys were really, really smart, but they had no morals. So if you have using your powers of evil instead of good, what good is it? So, we want to inspire men of true courage, and one I think that has true courage has some morals about them. They're fighting for a cause. They're not just fighting to go out there because they like to kill people. They're fighting for a reason. So I think those are the reasons why this is important for us. And then also I'm going to tie this in tonight to how all this applies to us. Okay. All right. Next little section, part 3 here. How was David's military organized? And I never read anything about this, so this was pretty cool for me. And I'll give you, if you're a student of this or this is interesting to you, I'll give you this name. There's a lady by the name of Luisa Rodriguez. Luisa Rodriguez. She writes this little series of things called Bible Warfare. And she is a Bible student, she says. She's also an author and an illustrator. And she says in her former life, she was a civilian analyst for the U.S. Navy. She has a master's degree from the National Security and Strategic Studies from the Navy War College. So she, as a career before this, she was an advisor to the military. She was one of those intellectual experts. And, you may have saw some of these in movies. If you ever saw Top Gun, where Maverick, the pilot, his love interest in there is this lady, and she's a civilian expert working from the military. And there's a movie out there called Crimson Tide about a submarine thing going on, and the guy they get on there, he's one of the Baldwin brothers that plays a part, but he's a civilian expert on Russian submarine warfare, and he helps them throughout the movie. So if you hadn't saw it, I won't spoil the ending for you. But those things exist, those jobs exist. So there's people out there who are experts in these things. So this lady, it's kind of what she does, but she has applied that to the Bible. So I think that's pretty cool. If you've got an ability, some talent, and you can share it to help people understand the Bible, that's great. I have no idea if this lady's a member of the church, but it's helped me prepare the lesson. So I appreciate her for that. Okay, but she talked about in her writings, the organization of David's fighting force showed his brilliance as a military leader. Of course, we know God was on his side, and also allowed him to grow Israel into the empire that it was. But David had basically 3 branches of his military, and not unlike ours, I guess you would say. But number 1 was the army. That's what they're called, the army of David. And they usually numbered somewhere between 35,000 men. They were a standing army of professional soldiers that fought. That's what they did. That was their job. Okay, they didn't do anything else. They were full-time soldiers. And they had the militia, or the people they're called sometimes, and these could number, over 100,000. We read, you add up sometimes the numbers in the Bible where certain battles, they would have, a whole lot of people out there. Those were more citizen soldiers. They were had reserve duties, and according to her, the way they did that, they were committed to serve 1 month per year. So they rotated those through from all the 12 tribes. It wasn't just, okay, tribe 1, Benjamin tribe, you got this month. It was, they had experts from all those different tribes, and they served a month out of the year. And that made a lot of sense, because it's kind of impractical to maintain a large standing army when you don't need it all the time. Very expensive for one thing. The other thing, kill your economy if all your working age men are in the army and they're not, working a job. So that doesn't work out very well. So it was pretty smart to do it that way. So when they needed them, they were called up, they were trained. Some countries, even today, all their young men, and maybe even young women for some of them, but they are required to do a year or 2 years of military service, usually when they turn 18 or 19. Everybody has to, and then you can go about your life. That way their whole populace is trained, and they know how to, a little bit of military discipline, how to handle a weapon, all those kind of things. So, my Jordan, she's all about this Korean K-pop music that her sister got her hooked on a long time ago. But a couple of her boys in her boy band, they're kind of like Korean Beatles, if you want to kind of our age. But they're kind of had to take a couple of years off, because some of their guys, 2 or 3 of them in their band, are from South Korea, and they're serving their military hits right now. So they can't go out and tour and make music and all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool. Okay. But anyway, that's kind of how the militia was. And then they had the Royal Guard. The Royal Guard was, we're really not told the number, but they were a small force, basically a foreign mercenaries. And they told the tribe they were from, and I can't remember, and I didn't write it down, I'm sorry. But they were loyal only to King David, okay? And you say, why would the Royal Guard, the ones who was closest to him, be foreigners? Why would you not rather have local guys to take care of you? Well, that was another part of David's smarts there. If you know or read a little bit about the Israelites, they were tribes, and they were tribal. So they had ongoing, disputes just like brothers do in a family, tribes did between each other. And to keep the peace, it's like, I want people around me who are only loyalty is to me. They don't have any tribal affiliation to anybody else. They just work for me, and they're loyal to me, and that's it. So that worked. And he had one of his mighty men to lead them, but they didn't have any ties to anybody else, because we see throughout the Bible that there were, rebellions and different things that went on with them all the time. So you kind of avoided that by having these men around him who were the Royal Guard. Of course, they were highly trained and very good at what they did and all those kind of things. And then you had the mighty men that we're talking about tonight, or the 30. Now, a little bit about that number. The 30 can be a little bit misleading, okay, because there was actually more than 30. Actually, here we're studying tonight, they list there's 37 of them. And in some places you'll read given names that it may be over 50. You'll say, well, that's, is the Bible inconsistent? No. It was kind of a fluid force. They came and they went. As men died, they were replaced. When they retired, they were replaced, whatever. So that's not inconsistent, but they were known as the 30, just like the 12 apostles. There was more than 12 of them, and some came in, some went out. Okay, so that's kind of how that worked. This group was small, but they were very unique. They're composed of David's most elite warriors. Kind of, I guess we think about today, kind of relate to our terms. It'd be like every one of our military branches has a elite group. Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, all those kind of things. So we've got these special groups of guys, SEAL Team 6, whatever, even special of the special, who go out and do these special projects. So you got these. When I was a teenager, I met a SEAL, Navy SEAL one time, and I was not old enough to understand or appreciate what it was, but I knew he was a very physically imposing, very intimidating guy. He was very nice, but he just something different about him, We family rented some land from an older couple, a farm from them, and their grandson was a Navy SEAL, and he came to visit one time, and I got to meet him. I said, hey, he's a Navy SEAL. I said, okay, all right. Looks like a good dude, but that's about all I knew. But I know a lot more now. I wish I could go back and meet him again. But he was one of these mighty men for us today. Okay. All right. So who were these? Well, before I get to that, there was also the hierarchy of command that came through this. Of course, at the top, you had King David. And then underneath him were the 30. And then of that 30, you had Benaniah, who was the commander of the Royal Guard, and you had Joab, who was the general of David's army. So that's kind of how it all shook out, levels of command structure as you came down, as you went up the ranks, okay? So who were they? Well, most of them, if not all, had been with David since his early days when he was on the run from King Saul. So they had been through it together, and you trust those people who you've been through things together with, I know, like I said, I've never been through basic training, but I know, men who have, and they say you earned a special bond with those guys you train with, and then especially once if you get into combat, an even tighter bond for each other, as you got each other's back. On the sports thing, I can relate to, but, time you go through a summer training camp or a summer of working out or whatever, you go through some hard things and you kind of bond together there. So there's a bonding that takes place where you can count on each other. Okay, and that's kind of how they were. They had been with him through thick and thin when he was at his lowest, and when he was on the run, when he was a fugitive. They were there for him. They were kind of a motley crew, extremely diverse, as a wide variety of backgrounds and obscure hometowns. One author said that they were from hick towns, and probably if you read the names and where they're from, most of those I never really heard of. They weren't distinctive places in the Bible. But he defined a hick town as a place where you can park as long as you want to, but you don't want to. So that's kind of a hick town, I guess. So I grew up in one of those. Okay. But at least 3 of them were foreigners. They were not your clean-cut choir boys born with a silver spoon in their mouth. They were just the opposite. They were distressed under the reign of Saul. They were debtors. They were malcontents. They had problems, and they had things in their past they had to overcome. So they kind of like, when I first read this, I thought, hey, that sounds like Robin Hood and the Merry Men, kind of all these guys who were running from the law in the current administration, and they all kind of flocked together and stuck together. But what held them together? If they were such diverse background, what made them bond? Well, two basic things. They were attracted to David as a person. He was a charismatic leader, okay? Wherever he went, he just kind of became a leader. And you see people like that. I've known people like that, where if you put them in a room with 10 people or 50 people, they'll end up being a leader. Not that they get up front and grab the microphone and say, listen to me, I'm the boss. They just kind of have that, and people are kind of drawn to him. I think David kind of had that personality that people were drawn to him. For one, I think he was genuine. Like I said, he was a man after God's own heart. He had a deep belief in his cause, and for the most part, he was, like I said, honest about what he did in all of his dealings. These people were not draftees. They weren't unwillingly, grudgingly fulfilling their duty. They were volunteers. They served out devotion to David, and they believed that he was God's chosen leader. So, two reasons there that they followed him. They were attracted to him, and they were committed to his cause. So, we'll talk about that for us in a little bit later. All right. So, what about the names of these guys? Okay, I'm going to do you a big favor tonight. I'm not going to embarrass myself and hurt your ears by me trying to pronounce all these guys' names. Ben did that the other night, and I'll let that lie. Okay, we'll try to pronounce a few of them, but they're names that probably you wouldn't look to naming your kids today because it'd be too hard for them to learn how to spell or pronounce. Okay, so maybe David, but a few of these others, Joab, but not all those others. All right. The biblical text really doesn't provide us information to determine if this group ever deployed as a whole unit. Okay, there was about 30 of them, okay? But we don't know that they ever actually fought all together. Biblical evidence, though, kind of implies that they worked in squads of 3 because we see them mentioned in groups of 3. All right? Bible gives us details on 2, possibly 3 of these distinct squads and who their leader was. We also know that some of these units were more distinguished or more highly decorated, we would say today, than the others. Because it seems that they kind of might, over time, kind of evolved into like this elite council for David. They were kind of his men that he listened to. And they kind of led divisions all across the military in different groups. So they may have operated like this as squads of 3 early on in their infancy when they first started doing things. And I think that's some of the record we get of some of their exploits when they were operating as groups of 3 early on. They're basically, though, divided into 3 ranks or 3 levels based on their service record. Okay, so the first 3 were the most accomplished, and they had the greatest reputation. And that first one was Jehoshaphat or Adino, and we read about him in verse 8 there, and it says he slew 800 at once with a spear. Okay, if he didn't ever do anything else in his whole military career, if he killed 800 men at once with a spear, he should get in the list. Okay, so he's in the list, and he's in the top 3, so I'm sure he did other things, but that's the one thing that's recorded about him. The next one is Eleazar. We read there in verse 9 through 10 about him. It says he fought till he couldn't release his grip on his sword. And at the time this battle was going on, most of the other Israelite fighters left. They fled and kind of left him alone, and some of the other mighty men maybe, but him for sure. And he didn't care. I'm by myself. I don't care. It's me against them. I'm surrounded. Talking about the Marines, I read a little thing one time. One of the most famous Marines, probably a guy named Chesty Puller in World War II, but he said they were on the islands in the Pacific, and someone said, hey, we're surrounded. He said, we're Marines. We're supposed to be surrounded. So what? Don't worry about it, okay? So he said, I'm surrounded. So what? It's me and God against them, so I feel good about it. But have you ever held on to something so tight and so long you couldn't hardly turn loose of it? Probably have. I was track coach several years ago, and we'd been to a meet. It seemed like it was down around Montgomery or somewhere, and we were driving home late that night, and it got really stormy. And I was getting sleepy and tired. I'd been doing it all day long. And when it started storming really bad, I could barely see out and I had my grip on the steering wheel of that bus as tight as I could, and just making sure that I saw the lights in front of me. Luckily, there was somebody in front of me that I could see their tail lights, and I just tried to follow them, but I really couldn't even see the stripe in the road. So by the time I got out of that and I got ready to turn my hand off the bus, I couldn't hardly, my knuckles were so white I couldn't hardly bend them. So, nothing like what he did, but I can relate to that a little bit. But imagine fighting till you so long that you can't hardly turn loose of the sword you've been swinging it so long. And that's the other thing about the way these guys fought. Okay, remember, training now, in training you learn how to operate your weapon. You may be a specialist, learn how to be artillery or whatever, but, then you have hand-to-hand combat fighting. That's all they had, hand-to-hand combat fighting. So you were face-to-face with the guy you were fighting with. Maybe you were shooting an arrow at him or throwing a spear, but most of the time you were, nose to nose, looking him in the eye, smelling his breath, and you were fighting hand-to-hand. So that's the kind of men these guys were and what they had to go through. And he says there that the others returned after the victory to strip the slain. So these kind of cowardly group that kind of gave up the fight and ran away, he stayed and kept fighting. They came back after it was over with, and they got in, and started collecting all the stuff left over from the dead guys and taking their weapons and whatever they had on them. So, that he was not afraid to stand alone. And then the other one of this first group was Shammah, verses 11 and 12. It says he defeated a group of foraging Philistines in a field of grain. One place it says lentils, I think another barley. But anyway, one thing the Philistines kind of seemed to do back during those days is just harass the Israelites at that all the time, especially at harvest time. They would just come on raids, and after they'd grown their crops, they'd just come in and steal them, okay, and just take them. And if that's how you had to live, then you better be willing to fight for it, So, there was no, I don't have anything, so I'll run down to Walmart, I'll go to the grocery store. There was none. If you didn't grow it and save it and keep it up, you didn't have any food. Kind of reminds me of a story that I heard old stories. I love history. I'm a science guy at school, but I love history, and I love hearing about that. But hearing old family stories, but I heard a story about one older lady that was in our family back during the Civil War, and she was at home by herself, and all the men were all fighting, and the home guard come by, who was supposed to be taking care of all the people while everybody was all fighting, but basically I think more than that, they terrorized everybody. But they came by and was going to steal her hog, and she only had one hog, and if they took that hog, she didn't have anything to eat that winter. So she fought for the hog. So she didn't give it up. She was a tough old lady, and I'm not giving up. You're not taking all I got. So that's kind of how he was here. He a lot of people left. He didn't. He stood in the field and he fought. All right. It says there that here it said the Lord wrought a great victory. So no matter how great the bravery of these men were, the praise and the achievement always had to go to God. It said, let not the strong man glory in his strength, but let all glory go to God who gave him that strength. So, we have to remember that. And you see that sometimes on TV. I don't know how sincere they are sometimes, but you hear some of these athletes, they'll interview them after the game and say, give God all the glory for the victory tonight, But, that's good. I hope they mean it, but you do hear that. That's kind of what they're saying here. No matter what you accomplish, no matter how smart or strong or tough you are, without God, you're nothing. Now, some of the scholars that I read about think that these same three here were the three that Ben talked about that were in the cave of Adullam with David. And that could be, or it could be a separate three. We're not sure. But this one thought that. But you remember the story there that David was kind of just made this offhand comment, man, I wish I had a drink from that well in Bethlehem. It's, all of us kind of get, pining for the old days and something we used to have, something that Grandma used to cook or, water or whatever. There was a well that we used to have in my great aunt's house, and they even later when they built a nicer brick house, they still had that old well out front and had a bucket you could let down in a tin dipper you could dip, and the water was so good. So I always, when I went back, I always get a drink of her water, so I kind of relate to what he was saying here. But anyway, he just made that offhand comment, boy, I wish I had some of that water. Well, he didn't tell these guys to do it, but three of them broke through the enemy lines and went back and got him a container of that water and brought it back to him, and he was kind of, first I think he was impressed if they thought enough of him to do that, and that's what it was. They had enough respect for David and love for him that that's what you want, then we'll get it for you, no matter what the cost. And, of course, he said, I'm not going to drink that. I'm not worthy to drink that you risked your life to get. he says, I'll offer that to God and pour it out on the ground as a drink offering. We see that sometimes where that happened in the Bible where they offered drink offering. And he made a drink offering out of that water just to show that, I really appreciate what you did, but I can't accept this gift. And, you may have done that with something somebody's got with you before. Maybe they got you something, and, you men that are married, or if you've had a girlfriend, sometimes they don't tell you what you want. You're supposed to read their mind, okay, and figure that out. So if they make a hint about something, you better be listening real close. Well, what do you want? Well, I don't want anything. But then later they say, well, I really did like that purse back there I saw. So you better pick up on those little hints. So that's kind of what they thought they were doing, but it wasn't. He really didn't want it, okay? He was just thinking that. All right. My page is stuck here. All right, the second three that are mentioned there, they're distinguished above the 30, but not hardly to the level of those top three right there. And they are Abishai, the brother of Joab, and also then the nephew of David. And he's famous for killing 300 men at once. And he's the one also who later saved an older King David from a giant during battle. You remember that story we've talked about during this class, is how later when David was getting on up in years and he was still going out to fight, and he had always kind of led from the front, that he got in trouble there, and he wasn't hardly as good as he used to be. And giant almost got him, and this guy here saved him. And after that, they said, you're not going out with us anymore. We don't want to extinguish the light. You're our figurehead, our leader. As long as you're alive, then that's going to inspire everybody. And right now, you can do your best by staying at home and not coming out and putting yourself in danger. But he was the one who saved him at that time. And then Benaiah, who slew two Moabites. He also killed a lion in a snowy pit. And probably another even more impressive thing is he slew an Egyptian giant. And we estimate that guy was about 7.5 feet tall. So about as tall as Shaq, or somebody like that. Okay. And matter of fact, when he went into battle with him, the Egyptian giant had a spear, and all he had was a club. But he evened up the odds by taking the spear away from the giant and killing him with his own spear. So, a guy who had some skill as a warrior and some bravery, obviously. And then later he was made captain of the royal guards. And then later on after that, actually commanded the entire army under King Solomon, under David's son. When he took over, he arose to do that after Joab was out of the picture, which we'll mention a little bit later. And then the other one of those is not named. We don't know who the other one is. I couldn't find that. Some of y'all that know more about this story may can, but of those second three, we only really have two names. And then the other 31 of those 37, they were inferior, of course, to those first six, but nonetheless, they were part of a special group. Okay, they're the best of the best. So if you make that group, you've done well. And we read their names. Like I said, we won't go through all those names again tonight, but they're there for you to look at. And we know a little bit about some of those, but not so much. Most of what we know is about the ones we mentioned already. Of that group, the last one that's mentioned is kind of interesting. He's last but not least, and that's Uriah the Hittite. Okay, we know what David did to Uriah. Of course, slept with his wife, committed adultery with her, then got him back and tried to cover it up. And if you remember, he thought, well, I'll get Uriah to come back, and he'll go home to his wife, and I can say, hey, that's your child and all that. He wouldn't do it. He was too honorable a guy. He was one of these mighty men. And he said, how can I go back to my house and sleep in my bed with my wife while all my fellow soldiers are out there in the field fighting? And plus the Ark of the Covenant's in danger out there. He said, I'm not going to do that. So he was a man of integrity. He showed the kind of character that these guys had. So he was the last one mentioned. Why was he the last one? I don't know. Maybe just because of what had happened to him. But anyway, he was one of those mighty men. He was definitely loyal to David, and he was loyal to the country and to his fellow soldiers and to God, which made it an even worse thing of what David had done to him. And then also there were some pagans among that 30. There were some people who were not native Israelites. Zelek the Ammonite, Ithman the Moabite, and then Uriah the Hittite. So the question that arose in some of these studies was like, why would these men leave their home country and leave their gods and their customs and their cultures to come fight with David? And Were they mercenaries? Were they hired to be there? But I think if you look at the story enough, you'll see that they were not. Because just look at Uriah. He was from a foreign country. He worshipped foreign gods growing up. But when he came here, he converted. He was a convert. And he was concerned about not just his fellow soldiers, but also about the Ark of the Covenant. So I think we see from this that these three men were part of that three that were definitely, glad to be a part of that. They had were shaking their old country and become a part here, just like we have naturalized citizens. Okay, and you can read all kinds of stories and Medal of Honor winners and people in our military who grew up in some other country who came here to fight. I read a story not too awful long ago about a guy who I forgot what country he had fought for, but he after the war was over with, I think over maybe World War II or Korea, he immigrated to the U.S. and became a citizen. And the first thing he did was join the military, and then fought in a couple of our wars on our side and achieved great things, there. So kind of a similar situation there. And those people sometimes have a greater appreciation for what it means to be an Americans than us who have always lived here our whole life, kind of take it for granted. And possibly that's how these three guys were. Maybe they coming from idolatry and paganism. It's like, man, this is something worth fighting for. This God that y'all got, he's the real deal, and I'm in. Sign me up. And I kind of feel like that was their attitude. Just like I said, some of these people you have today who come from other countries, and they say, y'all don't appreciate the freedoms y'all have. You should see where I grew up, what it was like. I would gladly go fight for that. So I feel like maybe that's where they were. Maybe David kind of swayed them to begin with his just charisma, to fight and join in this group of guys he had, his group of merry men. But I think they were definitely all in when it was over with. I want to talk just a minute about a notable admission on this list, and that's Joab. Joab was David's nephew, and he was the commanding general of David's army. He was fearless, talented, and responsible for the defeat and capture of a lot of David's enemy. He was a great military leader. And for some reason, he was left off the list. So two theories on that, really, that I've ran across. One was, well, he was just the leader of David's army, so we didn't even have to include him on the list. That's a given. You knew he's one of the mighty men. And the other one was maybe David left him off of here because even though he was very loyal to David and a great fighter, he was also kind of a complex individual. And he was also very impulsive, and he did things sometimes against David's orders and against his wishes. And among those, killing 3 men in cold blood, just because he thought they needed to die, even though David told him not kill them. So, maybe that's why he got left off the list. I'm not sure. But I think he's worth talking about a little bit, and we've heard about him. But just while I had this up, I wanted to go ahead and mention some things about Joab and some of the things he did. But like I said, he was definitely instrumental in expanding David's kingdom. And unfortunately, at the end of his life, he was executed under Solomon's rule for betrayal at the end of David's life. And we'll mention that in just a minute. But in his early days, very likely that Joab joined David at the caves, back when he was running from Saul. Because we do read there in 1 Samuel 22 that the rest of David's family came from Bethlehem and joined him there. I don't know, maybe they were afraid that Saul might take vengeance on them because he was mad at David, or maybe they're just like, hey, David's there, we got to go be with our kinsman and help him out. But for whatever reason, we read that David's father and his house, or his family, joined him in the cave as he was escaping from Saul. And it's during this about 7-year period, approximately, I think, maybe, that Joab kind of gained a reputation as a skilled fighter and kind of earned his leadership chops there. The men saw that how he conducted himself, and like, well, hey, I'm going to follow his example. He's going to lead. I'm going to do like he did. He was one of 3 warrior brothers. A lot of times when you read here, we often refer to him as Joab, the son of Zeruiah, who was David's sister. So that's how he was related to David. Now, a little something there we'll come back to in a few minutes, but that most people that you see mentioned in the Bible, their surname or their last name, however you want to look at that, their identification is through their family. David, son of Jesse, it's through their father. But here, these 3 brothers are mentioned by their sister. So evidently she she was a good mother. She produced some fighters here. But the early days, like I said, he was part of the family that came to David, and he jumped in there and got off. Now, one thing about Joab, he was kind of known as the chief executioner for David. He was his hitman. He was ruthless, especially when he considered somebody his enemy or David's enemy. He's like, if you're David's enemy, you're my enemy, and you're not going to. I'm all against you. In 3 recorded instances, says that he took it upon himself to execute high-ranking individuals, all of them against David's wishes. The first one was Abner, which Abner was the commander of Saul's army, and at the end of all that, when David was become king and Saul was dead, then David had made a deal with Abner to transfer the northern kingdom to David. They had split, civil war between the tribes, and Abner was leading those groups. And he said, let's kind of negotiate a peace here, and if you'll bring them in, everything will be okay. And there was conditions to surrender or whatever. Joab was not happy. Okay, he was a fighter, and he had been fighting against these guys, and he still wasn't willing to shake hands and be friends. So he also had a beef against Abner because he had killed his brother. And it was in self-defense, evidently, but still, you kill my brother, eye for an eye, I owe you one. So it wasn't long till him and his other brother had opportunity, and they murdered Abner. So, again, David had bartered a peace deal with him to try to reunite the tribes. Joab went against that deal and killed him because he had a gripe with him. The next one, of course, that we read about a lot, more common we heard about, was the murder of Absalom, David's son. When Absalom led a rebellion against David, David was heartbroken and more so about losing the kingdom than he was about losing his son, we think. But Joab, again, if you're enemy of David, if you've done something to David, then you're my enemy, and I'm not going to let that slide. So you remember the story during the battle. Of course, Joab and his forces were beating Absalom's, and he took off riding on his mule, and he ran under a thicket of trees, and he had famous for his long, pretty hair. He was a pretty boy, and his hair got caught in the limbs, and he was just hanging there. And somebody went and told Joab, said, hey, he's hanging over there in the tree. He's caught by his hair. So what are you going to do about it? Going to cut him down or what? David said, don't touch him. He said, whatever you do, don't harm my son. Well, Joab went over there, but he didn't cut him down. He ran a few spears through him. He said, you led this rebellion, then you deserve to die. So again, David did not sanction that. He did not want his son to be killed, but Joab did. And then Amasa, he was the commander of Absalom's army. Again, in an effort for David to try to bring the kingdom back together again after Absalom's coup, then he made Amasa the head of his army. So basically fired Joab and put the head of Absalom's army over all his army now. And that didn't sit very well with Joab either. So he kind of came up to him. It says he took him by the beard like he was going to give him a kiss, his friend. And when he did, he pulled a sword and stabbed him in the belly, and says his entrails spilled all over the ground. So, he was not afraid to shed blood. He was not shy about that. He was a rough, tough, tumble kind of guy, and sometimes that got him in trouble. Joab was also involved, of course, with the death of Uriah, because when David sent the letter by the hand of Uriah, he gave it to Joab. Joab read it. Joab did what he said. David said, put him in the front in the thickest fighting, and then withdraw and let him kill him. And he did that. So he was loyal to David above all else. So proved his loyalty to David there. So he had several great military accomplishments. We won't get into all those, but one of his first ones that he did, it kind of got him on the radar, was when David and his troops were sieging Jerusalem. And they were going to attack the city. And the way there was, of course, a walled city, but one way in was through a water tank or water shaft, whatever. So he said, the first guy that can figure out how to get in there, you'll be commander of my army. So Joab said, I'm your man. So he, at risk of life and limb, showing a lot of ingenuity and inventiveness, he found a way in, crawled up through there, and was able to let everybody else in, and then basically kind of was the what turned the tide there for David to capture Jerusalem and become the city of David. So that was one of his great accomplishments. He had many. I think another one that showed his loyalty to David. You remember when they captured the city of Rabbah, he was there and he took his army, and they had surrounded it and they had took the water supply. So the siege, if you can cut off their water supply, then you can't go long without water. And he could have easily just hung on and defeated them, but instead he sent word back to David, and David was back in the castle. He said, "Hey, bring the rest of the army." So evidently Joab was with the professional army, the standing army, and he sent word back to David, "Hey, you gather that militia, that big group, and y'all come, and you need to be the one who captures the city. I don't need to be chalked up to me some great thing I did. You're the king. I want you to get the credit." So he deferred. He bowed out and did not take that crown for himself, that achievement. Look how great I am. He was loyal to David, and he said, "Hey, you need to be the one who gets the star in your crown for capturing this city." So he did. Then a little bit about Joab's execution. While David never did take any action against him for these things that he did, David was kind of diplomatic. You see that in some of the kind of truces he tried to make and try to hold the people together. And I think he said, Joab he can be a little loose cannon sometimes, but I need him. He can do great things for us. So he just kind of would let it slide when he'd do some of these things sometimes that he had told him not to. But when David had passed and Solomon was ready to take over, one of his other sons, Adonijah, wanted to be the king. So he was going to lead a group to do that. So he went to Joab and said, "You're the leader of the army. If I can get you on my side, and we can take this thing. And I want to be the king, not Solomon." Well, David saw that, and he said, "Well, go ahead and had Solomon anointed, sworn in. We'd say, take the oath of office that you're going to be the king." And then because of that, that kind of, he picked the wrong side, just put it that way. So then after Solomon became king, David had told him, you need to deal with him. Okay. So he never did it, but he let Solomon take care of it. So Solomon said, we're going to get him. And the story behind that, if you never read about how that happened, was Joab fled to the tabernacle and tried to hide in there. It says he took hold of the horns of the altar. And then when Benaiah came in, he told him, "No, get out of here. We don't need to do this in the tabernacle." And he said, "Nope." He said, "If I die, I'm going to die here." So Solomon said, "Well, that's his choice. Do it." So he killed him there in the tabernacle, and that ended Joab's service. So, one of the mighty men for sure. Why was his name left off? Maybe because of these things that he had done. Maybe because he was just went without saying he was a leader of these guys, whatever. But he was not in our list. Okay, so a little history there. But now get to the meat of what I want to talk about really tonight for the last few minutes. But how does this apply to us today? Okay, basically the Lord needs mighty men today. Okay, just like David needed those mighty men for him to secure his kingdom and against all the enemies and everything that was going on. Today, Jesus needs us. God needs us. The Lord needs us as mighty men, and that's men and women. Okay, now the men, we get a lot of the talk, and we say man, that's used, but a lot of times it's also including women. Going back there to Joab's mother, evidently she was a good woman who raised good sons that were fighters and loyal, and she did what she needed to do to be a mom. Don't know about the dad, but her name is mentioned, so she must have been doing something right. So women have a place too. All right, no matter what that is, it may not be up front leading the battle, but there's things. That guy I mentioned, y'all, who I met that was the Navy SEAL. His dad was the only child, this older couple that we rented this farm from. They were in their late 80s, almost 90 at that time. And they had one son, and during World War II, he joined the Navy. So when he joined the Navy, they said, well, we can't fight with him, but we're going to help build the ship he's going to be on. So they moved to Mobile and worked in the docks there, building ships. So Miss McGee was one of those Rosie the Riveter ladies, and Mr. McGee helped with that too. So great family. But that's kind of, women have a role, whatever that may be. But men who are committed, we need people who are like these mighty men that are attracted to the person of Jesus, to his personality, to what he did for him as a man, and what he did when he was here on this earth. And we also need men that are committed to the cause. We need strong men of faith. The New Testament makes it clear that God desires men to be spiritual leadership in the home and at church. And unfortunately, we don't see that a lot today, not near as much as we used to. Okay, it's anybody can father a child, but not everybody can be a father to a child, and we see that way too much in our society today. We need men to step up, be leaders in their home, be leaders in their community, be leaders most of all in church. And following in those two things we talked about, number one, men who are attracted to the person of Jesus, like those mighty men of old in the church. We come from a lot of different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, economic, geographical, family, racial, whatever our differences may be, but we're all one when it comes to the cross. We're all the same. God doesn't see any difference to us. So in that, it can bring us together and unite us. Just like these guys were from all over the place, all these little hick towns, and even 3 from foreign countries, we can unite for a common cause and commit to that. Just like David accepted these men that had difficult pasts, they had histories, they had things they had done. Same with us. The Lord doesn't require that you solve all your problems before you come to Him. A lot of people don't understand that. We're doing this emphasis on evangelism right now. That's something some people have a hard time understanding. I'm not good enough. We'll take care of that. You'll grow. You'll learn. Okay? You don't have to be perfect to accept Jesus. And for us to stress that to these people and make it plain to them. So just like they submitted themselves, we need to do the same. We also need people who are committed. I read this little thing I shared with you. I know we're getting close to time, but this was from a denominational leader. But he made this statement. He was bemoaning their group, their religious group's lack of commitment. He said 90% of the churches in our denomination across the country require less commitment than the local Kiwanis Club. Okay, so it takes less to be a member of our church than it does for you to be a member of the Kiwanis Club. Less commitment, time, money spent to come here. That's not a good thing. Okay. Other sign, it was a church sign. Y'all may see these little funnies sometimes where they got church sign, funny things on the church sign. This one says Light Church, L-I-T-E. He says 24% fewer commitments, only 7.5% tithing, 15-minute sermons, 45-minute worship service. We got 8 out of 10 commandments. You choose which ones you want to obey. So anything to get you in. Okay, so we can get the numbers up, but if we have numbers but we don't have commitment, is that really what we need? Okay, so God needs people who are committed. We need people who are 100% into that, committed to the cause of Christ. There's no greater cause. God promised David his house, his kingdom would endure forever. There in 2 Samuel 7:16. And the kingdom of God goes all the way back there in history and extends all the way into eternity. Okay, we have the privilege of being part of advancing that. So we can be a part of something great. Everybody wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. I don't care who you are. I see kids at school, and more public school, not so much now, but they wanted to be a part of something. They might not have been an athlete, or they might not have been musically involved, but they want to be a part of something. And sometimes that may be a group over here that's not doing good. They may be wearing the weird clothes and doing all this other kind of stuff, but they'll be a part of a group. And that's what these gangs in big cities kind of prey on, is kids that don't belong anywhere. Come to us, we'll be your family. So we need to be that family. We need to have that commitment to inviting these people in and letting us be a part of them, to be a part of that we can make it build. We need those mighty men. We need those faithful troops to pull it off just like he did. The Lord's not called us to be a bunch of isolated people. He wants us to be a team. It's all teamwork. Everybody has a part to play. Just like sermon this morning, everybody's got something they can do. And I've heard this, I think Ben mentioned it before, but maybe it was a chapel lesson at church, but I heard the same story. But there was a lady, she was bedridden. She could not get out of bed. She'd been down for years. And she said, I want to do something to help. So she had the list of everybody's phone number, and she said, send me a list of everybody who missed services today. And every Sunday, if you weren't at church, you got a call from her and checking up on you. Hey, we missed you. We're caring about you. I'm in the bed. I can't come, but why were you not there? So she did a great work, and she couldn't even get down on her feet and walk around and make it 2 services, but she did something she could do. So what are some quick facts? Facts are that odds are always against us. We're always going to be outnumbered, just like the mighty men. They were few, but they were powerful. If God's with us, who can be against us? You can count on being tired, okay? If you commit to this work, you're going to be tired. Eliezer was so tired he couldn't open his hand. Don't grow weary in well-doing. God will give us rest from our labors after we did, okay? Too many people in the church, unfortunately, rust out. They don't wear out, okay? And don't be that, Wear yourself out from service. Find something you can do. We must be prepared to go against the crowd. Just like those warriors fled, left him there on the field, in that lentil field all by himself. He stood there. They came back later. They rejoined after times got good, but they were still there. But he made a great victory. And we got to take the initiative. We can't be passive. The only thing that's required, what they said, that little saying, of evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. So we can't be passive. We got to take the initiative, find something, do something. Okay. There's a church counselor asked what's the number one problem they face in counseling Christian families. His response didn't even hesitate: passive males. He said men that are not willing to take the lead. Too many times in their homes, the mom is the one who has to be the one who brings the kid to church, be sure that they're doing their Bible memory verse, whatever. Men, we got to step up. We got to do a better job. Okay, we need men that are willing to lead, to teach, to do maintenance on the building, sign cards, whatever that list may be. All of us have something we can do. God has proven over and over that he can accomplish great things with a small group of committed individuals. Okay, and that's kind of the key to the whole lesson tonight. God can do a lot with a small group if they're committed, if they're willing to do it. So it says the Lord brought them a great victory. What great victory can he do for us here at Highland Park if we're a group of people that are willing to commit to it and give it all we got? So that's my challenge to you tonight. Hopefully that's what you learned from our lesson. So thank you for your attention. And quick prayer, and we'll let you go. Father, thank you for today, for this opportunity to come out and worship you. Pray, Father, that you'd be with Ben as he is away in Missouri in a meeting. Pray that he'll be safe and he'll yield much fruit from his work there. Father, be with Brother Mike as he is overseas in Bangladesh doing his work. Pray that team blessing on him, that he'd be safe and he'd be returned to us soon. Father, be with each of us as we leave tonight. Guard, and direct us and help us to be faithful to you. We look forward to meeting again on Wednesday night. All these things we ask in Christ's name. Amen.